Hi guys, this is Debbie from Debbie J's Crafting Corner. For today's project, I'm creating this cute Runsational Valentine's Day card using the Runsational stamp set from Colorado Craft Company. Now I've been wanting this stamp set for a while and I finally got around to getting it. I have quite a few insane runners in my life and I'm sure that you do too. Although you may not have it quite as bad as I do. My husband is not only a runner but an Ironman triathlete as well. While I'll probably never get to the point that I can do a triathlon, but I am trying to get healthier and more fit, and I hope that I can finally do another 5K race this year. Anyway, this stamp set is perfect for all of those insane people in your life. And I'm glad I got this when I did. It's still available, but it's being discontinued soon. I did put an affiliate link down below in case you're interested in this set. This stamp set has a lot of really nice sentiments, including think, be strong, finish, do it now, breathe it in, run it out. And the one I'm going to be using for this card is the one that says, you are Runsational. I thought that that would be so appropriate for a Valentine's Day card, but there are a lot of sentiments on here that would work for any type of runner that you have in your life. Now this is one that is a very encouraging set, so that is probably one of the reasons why I really love this one. So here's the card that I made earlier today. I created some background paper for the card panel and then cut a heart out, and then I've got the legs of those runners peeking through, and then there's that sentiment that I mentioned, you are Runsational. So I just love the way that this one turned out, and because I cut the heart out, I'm able to do a 2-for-1 card. So I'm going to go ahead and create another set of these now. So let's go ahead and get started. First, I'll stamp out the legs of the runners. I'm using my Tim Holtz stamp platform and that DIY sticky grid that I made in a previous video. I'll leave a link to that video here for you. I'm also using just a scrap piece of cardstock that I've got in my stash, just so that I can go ahead and start using some of this up. And even though it's smaller than a regular card base size, it's perfectly fine because I'm not going to be showing this entire size in this card. It's going to be covered with that other panel. So I'm just going to stamp this pretty much in the center of my scrap of cardstock here. Stamp it with some red ink. It turns out that when I did that, it wound up giving a slightly almost no line coloring kind of look to the image, and that wasn't my intention to begin with. I was just doing it in red because the rest of the card was going to be red, but I think it turned out really nice that way. So I'm going to go ahead and use some red Catherine Pooler ink. The one that I'm going to be using for this is going to be the new one that she's got out that came out at Christmas, and that is Cranberry Fizz. So I'm going to stamp that out using the Cranberry Fizz ink. To try to get a really good stamped image and get the pressure pretty much even throughout, I'm just using a microfiber cloth and rubbing that over the surface of my stamp platform. It slides really well and it makes it easier than me trying to push down on it with my fingertips. Next, I'll do some simple coloring with my Spectrum Noir markers. For the little bit of sky that you see behind the runner's legs, I'm using primarily my blender pen and the TB1 blue. This is a real light blue, and the blender marker tends to kind of just pull the color out a little bit so that it's a little softer back there behind the runner's legs. Next, I'm coloring in the runner's legs. For this, I'm just going to use two colors of marker, the FS1 and FS2. FS2 is a little darker and a little pinker than the FS1, so I'm just using it for the details and the little places of shadowing that I want to show up on each of those runner's legs. And then I'll blend that all out with the FS1. Now that all the flesh part of the legs are done, I'll move on to the first of the pants or shorts that are being worn by our runners. One of the runners in the front is a woman, and she's wearing some crop style, crop length running pants. So I'm just using some dark colors because I tend to wear black when I'm out running. So I'm using the IG8 and IG5. IG8 to put in all of those primary shadows to basically make her legs look curved with a highlight in the center. Give them a little bit of dimension there, and then I'm going to try blending that out with the IG4 and then IG3. It turns out that the IG4 worked better than the IG3 because the IG3 kind of bleached it out, so I just go back in with a second layer of the colors to get that darkened up real nice. Then I went ahead and finished up the shorts for the other runners. I used OR1 and 2 and TB2, 4, and 6, and then IG8, 5, and 4 for the last runner. Then for the bibs, there's a couple of them that you can see the writing on there, so I went ahead and used OR1 for the color on that. Now I'm just adding some brown to the path that they're on. I'm assuming that they are running on a dirt trail instead of concrete, although a lot of races are done on concrete instead. And I'm just coloring that in with my MB1 and my MB2 and MB3 markers. Trees and bushes, I started off with just blocking in some color on those with the AG1, and then I'm going back in with my darker shades to add some shading and a little bit of contrast between the different bushes. Again, this is some simple coloring, so for each one I'm pretty much just using a couple of markers, using the darker shades as kind of contrast and then going back in with a lighter tone to blend them out. For their t-shirts, to keep it simple, I'm assuming that all of their t-shirts are basically white. So I'm just going in with my colorless blender and some gray markers to give it a little bit of contrast and shape. I'm using IG8, IG4, and then that blender, alcohol blender pen. With the coloring finished, I'll start on the rest of the front panel. I'm using some scraps from a couple of pattern paper pages in the Be My Valentine paper pack that I've had in my stash since last year. This was one that I picked up at Michael's, but I did find a link to it over on Amazon because I don't know if Michael's still has this one. Anyway, I'll be creating a striped panel, and I'm using the new Stripes 2 die set from Simon Says Stamp. This die set has two sections, two different sizes of stripes. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make one pattern paper is going to be the thin stripes, and the other pattern paper is going to be the thicker stripes. So I'm just going to tack those down with some purple tape and then run that through my Gemini Junior. So now I've got 3 wider strips and 4 of the narrower strips, and these just cut out absolutely perfect. Now you could use your paper trimmer for this, but what I find that is true, at least for me, is I seldom get all of my strips the same, basically straight. I'm always going to have them just a little bit off, and they're not going to be exactly parallel. The two lines are not going to be exactly parallel on my strips. This way they are all exact and I don't have to worry about it. So now I'm going to go ahead and create that pattern paper, and to do that, what I did, and this is the second time using this piece, is I've got a sheet. Actually, I have multiple sheets of misprint paper that I've just got sitting here. I could have thrown it away, but instead I decided to use that as the backing for my strips. And I just added some scrapbook.com double-sided adhesive to this. So I went ahead and put that down, and now I'm just going to peel back part of it so I can start laying my strips down. Since I have more of the thin strips, I'm going to go ahead and put one of those down as the bottom strip, and it's also going to be the top strip. So I'm going to go narrow and then wide, and then narrow and then wide and then narrow. So it'll be a complete panel using up all of those strips. And it turns out that the thickness, the width of the height of the panel, looking at it from this direction, is going to be just about the right size for the front of an A2 size card when you use a little bit of a white border. So this is going to be one of my favorite ways to do card panels now, and I'll get to use up a bunch of that excess scrapbook paper because I just have lots and lots and lots of those pads. Next, I'll go ahead and trim that panel down. First, just evening up one side of it and trimming off any of that excess backing paper. And then I'm going to trim it down to about 5 inches wide by 3 3/4. Now, I'm going to have to clean my blade here because after cutting through the adhesive and such, it is starting to get a little bit sticky, so I'm going to have to clean that up. Next, I'll cut a heart out of this panel. I'm using the heart-shaped torn edge dies from Gemini Elements, but you could use any heart die that you have in your stash. Just make sure that the heart is big enough or the right size so that the stamped image will show through the opening. Now we can start putting this card together. I'm adhering the stamped and colored image behind my front panel using some dot liner adhesive. Since the stamped panel is larger than the front panel is, I'm just going to go ahead and trim off all that excess white cardstock. Next, I'll need a card base. I'm taking a sheet of 8.5 by 11 heavyweight Recollections cardstock and cutting it at 5.5 inches. This will give me 2 card bases. Now on my paper trimmer, you see that piece of washi tape? I've got that on there as a guide because this is not quite wide enough to show 5.5 inches, so that's how I can determine that it's about right. Even if it's a little bit off, that's fine because I can always trim off the excess. Next, I'll score each of the panels at 4 1/4 using my EK Success scoring board. And as always, I turn it over so that the scored part is on the outside, and fold that over, and then I'll burnish it down to give it a nice crisp edge. And as I mentioned, I can always just trim off any excess if it's not exact at 4 1/2. The reason it's not usually exactly at 4 1/4. The reason it's not usually at 4 1/4 exactly is because the paper that I've got isn't actually 8.5. It's slightly larger, which I guess is better than having a slightly smaller, but it does mean that I tend to need to trim a little bit off of most of my cards. So far, this is a pretty flat card, but I do want a little dimension on here, so I'm going to go ahead and cover the back of that front panel completely with some foam tape from Arteza. I'm almost done with this roll, so that is a good thing. The foam tape is perfectly fine, the adhesive holds good and all of that, but I don't particularly like the plastic backing. Now, this is something that may not bother a lot of folks, but I think I'm going to try a couple of other brands of foam tape and decide whether or not I like this one better or not. I mean, like I said, it is good foam tape. The price point is good. It's the only thing that I don't like about it is that plastic backing. To give myself a little bit of wiggle room, I am going to go ahead and put some art glitter glue on all of those foam tape strips. The reason for this is because I am trying to get that little white border around the entire card and try to get it centered as well as I can. I'm going to need that wiggle room because I almost always put it down at least slightly crooked. Next, I need a sentiment, so I'm grabbing that Runsational sentiment from the stamp set and a scrap of white cardstock that was sitting in my scrap bin, and I'm going to stamp that with that Cranberry Fizz ink again. The stamp platform I'm using this time is just a stamp press from Fiskars. I figure I didn't really need to take out my Tim Holtz stamp platform for this little sentiment, and I'm just going to line it up with the grid lines on my craft mat, and then there are also some grid lines on the stamp press as well, so I can get that kind of lined up, and I'm lining it up mostly to the right hand side. Next, I'll go ahead and just trim that sentiment strip down using my Fiskars paper trimmer. Now, one of the things that I really like, it's got this finger guard, and then it's got about 1/8 of an inch past the finger guard is where the blade actually hits, which means if you line up the bottom of your sentiment with that finger guard and pushing it in towards the left hand side, you should get about 1/8 of an inch below your sentiment every single time. So it keeps it nice and straight, and it definitely helps me to make sure I get some decent sentiments where it's not all wonky. So now I'm going to go ahead and trim it the same on the other side. Also, this sentiment turns out to be right at about 1/2 of an inch, and the metal piece that has the blade guard on it, that metal piece is right at about 1/2 of an inch. So that helps me to be able to line up my sentiments pretty well. I'm going to go ahead and put this on the front of my card and have it positioned so that the sentiment is off to the right hand side. But I want to add a little bit more character to this, so I'm going to go ahead and trim that edge off at an angle and then adhere everything down with some art glitter glue. So that basically finishes up this card. But wait, we're not done yet. Remember that heart that we cut out up from the center of that panel? That will be perfect to create a second card with. So I'm just adding some of that same Arteza foam tape to the back of the heart, and then I'm going to adhere that to the center of a second card panel. For the sentiment on this card, I'm pulling out another stamp set. This is the Love Greetings Mix from Simon Says Stamp, and I think I'm going to go ahead and use this sentiment that says, "To the one who has my heart." I think that's pretty appropriate to go on a card that has that heart-shaped die cut on the front. And again, I'm just using that same Cranberry Fizz ink from Catherine Pooler. Now this looks so darn cute, but you know, I'm not quite done yet. I had used the Full of Heart Dynamics cover plate die from my favorite things. I don't know if it's still available, but I'll see if I can find a link and add that below for you. But I had cut out one panel, which means I had a ton of those little hearts. So I'm going to add a scattering of the hearts to the front of this card, as well as some of those little gems that I like to use from Hobby Lobby. Then I decided to add a sentiment to the inside of each of the cards. So I'm taking a couple of sentiments from the Love Greetings mix set, and on the Runsational one, I'm using the I Love You More Each Day stamp to go into the inside of that one, and then I'm going to add a couple of those little mini hearts as well. And then on the inside of the heart card, I'm adding the sentiment, "Your weird and my weird are a perfect match." I think that is just too funny. And then I'm going to add a couple of little hearts inside this card too. That finishes up these cards for today. I hope that this inspires you to create something great, and I would really love to see what you create. So come join my Facebook group, Crafting with Debbie, and show us your creations. I've left a link down in the description below. Here are some other videos that you may be interested in. Thank you so much for dropping by, and remember, if I can make it, you can too.